Hi everyone, you're watching Faz on Life Unfiltered. Today's guest is exceptional. Salim Rollins is originally from New York, moved to Kenya to teach Capoeira at Kibera. He has an incredible story to tell. He's also the co-founder at Inuka Cultural Center as well as Synergy Yoga. He talks about his experience and everything in between. Enjoy the episode. Salim.
Yes.
Welcome to Life Unfiltered.
Thank you.
It is such an honor to have you here, and thank you for making the time.
Sure, my pleasure.
Good. So Salim, we'll just start with the basics. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Who is Salim and what does Salim do?
What does Salim do? We can start there.
Yes, let's do that.
So professionally, I run two organizations. One is Inuka Cultural Center. It's a Kenya-based NGO, and we do youth empowerment and movement arts in Kibera.
Wow.
We have three pillar programs. So the program I founded is Capoeira Angola Center Kibera. I'm an instructor, mestre of Capoeira Angola. Then we have Slum Dance Africa, is a breakdance and Afro dance program, which is the foundational program. And we have the Girls Empowerment Program, which is empowerment career pathways for teen girls in Kibera. So that's one job, is co-directing that NGO, and then I co-direct a yoga school called Synergy Yoga. Nice. We're registered in the US. My business partner is Peruvian and lives in the Sacred Valley of Peru. We know each other through our mutual art form, Capoeira, which I just mentioned, Afro-Brazilian martial art. And a lot of what we're doing these days is primarily running retreats in the Sacred Valley, Peru, in Tulum, Mexico, and here in Kenya. My partner also does Thai bodywork certifications. So we have one coming to Kenya. This will be our third actually in Nairobi. And yoga teacher training. And we do other things. We do workshops. I do a workshop here in Nairobi called Yoga Acoustic with live music featuring Kenyan singer-songwriters. So we do other things as well. So those are the two primary things, and then there's like some small business in the U.S. as well. But
okay. So do I take it that you are from the U.S.?
Yes, I'm from the New York area, just suburbs outside of the city, White Plains specifically.
Amazing. And what brought you to Kenya?
So my ex-wife is Kenyan. We met in Brooklyn, New York. I was living in New York. We were both living in Brooklyn at the time, and she was a student at NYU. I was living, working, training capoeira and yoga in New York. And yeah, and we met at a party that I was throwing. I used to do events, and it was a great party. And I saw her and was like, who's that?
Love at first sight.
Smitten, yeah, immediately.
Wow.
The party got busy that night. She kind of disappeared into the crowd, and I was like, where is she? Couldn't find her. But I knew her cousin, so I talked to her cousin. I was like, where is Faduma? And she was like, you want to see her? You want to go on a date? She was so excited. So she helped coordinate and connect us. And from the first date, I was like, this is someone.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's a great story.
Yeah.
May all of us find love in that way. Great party, someone sees you in the party and it's like, that's the one.
Way. Exactly. It's true.
Amazing. Okay, so you met her and she's originally from here?
Yep. She's from Nairobi, yeah.
And how's that transition been for you, moving from New York to Kenya?
Yeah, so we moved from New York to Kenya in 2008, and it was a little over a year after we married, and less than a year after we married, conceived our firstborn, like as soon as we arrived here, I think within a couple days, and we're planning to have her born here, our first daughter, but we realized that with Faduma having a green card, that it made more sense to live in the States for a while. So she could get citizenship so that our children could be born in the States as well, just for immigration purposes. It's a bit smoother. So, and we were done with New York at the time, and we decided to move to the Bay Area, California, where my mom was living, and I had gone to university close to that area. So we lived in Oakland, California for 5 years, and then moved back here. So we came here from California. In terms of how the transition was, I was really happy to raise our children here in Kenya, in Africa, for many reasons. I was ready myself to have some time outside of the US and specifically to be on the continent. I had always wanted to establish some of my Capoeira Angola work in a community like Kibera. That was a longer vision I had literally decades ago, which has come to fruit now, and the group is just doing so well. I'm so proud of these kids. And so, yeah, I think you know, and also I would say having a strong family unit here in Kenya was really helpful. I mean, I have family in the US, but it's much smaller than the family that we have here, and so there's just a different level of support, and I think in terms of even the sort of values of Kenyan culture is more aligned with how I wanted to raise my children versus, you know, the U.S.
Sure. So, on that note, what was it like? Because you say the culture is different here. You know, what was it like as a African American moving to Africa? Like, did you feel like there was a difference in how people treated you or how you were treated there? Did you feel a sense of belonging? You know, was there any difference that you felt moving from one country?
Yeah, I would say my first experience was with my ex-wife's family, and they really welcomed me in. You know, so my kid's mom is Somali Kenyan. And I have an Arabic name, and I think, you know, and I can sort of, like, you know, possibly pass for Somali, but so I think there was a sort of identification with me as a person, and also, you know, I've traveled a good amount, so I'm not, you know, there are a lot of folks coming from the States who just haven't experienced the world. For various reasons, and but that wasn't me, and I had traveled already to Africa, I had lived in Brazil, and had certain experiences. So Kenya, to me, actually was a pretty easy place to transition to. I mean, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of kind of, you know, Western sort of development and comforts here. And so we could always get Wi-Fi, you know, the roads were relatively good, you know, so certain things, you know, kind of. And even if they weren't, I'm not someone who, you know, I would have made the move anyway, you know.
Right.
So my first sort of impressions were being welcomed in by this beautiful family, and those are connections that I still maintain until today. I'm in touch with my my in-laws and have a very good relationship also with my kid's mom. So yeah, so that was the first impressions, and then I think I found Kenya calm in a lot of ways. You know, let's say in comparison to my experiences in Ghana or West Africa or Brazil. So there's sort of a softness to the culture, I think, and the people. You know, they're not loud people typically by comparison to New York.
For sure.
And there's a gentleness. So I make the analogy that, like, I think East Africa in general is more aligned to the element of water, and like West Africa would be more fire. If you think of the music and the energy of some of the cities, if it's Lagos, if it's Accra. And so I really came to appreciate that as well. Like, I could, you know, my shoulders could start to soften, and I could sort of move around without, yes, you need to be aware in any city, and of course things go on, but honestly, I've had very few major challenges or issues or confrontation. There's been a couple, of course, but nothing, you know, major here. I mean, certainly not more than I experienced in New York or Oakland.
And that being said, what about going into Kibera? Like, what was that like? Because I know being in Nairobi, and most of us who live in Nairobi, we come to terms with, yes, there's, like you said, there's confrontation everywhere, or you have to be careful, you have to watch your back. But the same as when I went to New York, I felt exactly the same way. Exactly. However, going into Kibera is like a whole different ball game. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like as an African American going into that space?
Sure. I really first started going to Kibera through my colleague Victor Onyango, and he's the one who established the NGO we now co-direct. He brought me in to teach Capoeira. He brought me in to teach Capoeira Angola to youth. And I did that. I volunteered for about 2 years, going in, I think, around twice a week. And that's a community that he's from there, but also has strong ties as a community organizer. He started this program, Slum Dance Africa, after the '07 post-election violence as a resource for youth in the community to be able to express themselves, to work through the trauma that a lot of them experienced at that moment. And so there was already a sort of working youth program that I was invited into to teach. So I was all for it. I was like, oh, great. I had been teaching classes at like the YMCA and other venues, in the more traditional form of just kind of people pay per class or pay per month and, a class structured like that. But when I started teaching in Kibera, I was like, this is, these are my students. This is really who I want to be reaching with this art form, which to me is a very special art form and speaks a lot to certain needs the youth in that community in particular have. So I felt like I was sort of fulfilling what I was supposed to be doing with Capoeira here in Kenya by going to Kibera. Right. But I think being brought in by someone who's been really established and had his own trials establishing youth work in Kibera was not an easy path for him. When he first started doing that work, there was a lot of police interrogations and they thought he was selling drugs with youth and was arrested until they started to see kind of the work he was doing and, and really eventually came to support the work. The area chiefs and so forth really and so at this point, the work, has been there and it's known and it's an important hub in the community. So I felt very welcomed in general in Kibera. In terms of this question, though, I feel like there was this sort of sub-question about sort of safety and that. I mean, I've felt very comfortable there in general. There are a few places where I, if I'm going to like a conflict zone, then I'm sure I'd be scared. Right. But in terms of moving through urban spaces, I'm not uncomfortable in most places. And I actually have come to find that Kibera is actually it's to me safer than, let's say, town in Nairobi. There's that old school justice there and people don't just rob on, in the open, because they know the repercussions.
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that because I've been to Kibera myself a few times. And I actually didn't really feel that unsafe. Yeah. I felt like people were curious to know what I was doing there and, you have a lot of kids that come to you, and I think it's actually quite welcoming. And that's why I wanted to know your perspective in terms of, the first time. But I'm also someone who's born and raised in Kenya. Right. Not saying that makes me more comfortable being in Kibera, not at all, but I was just curious to know, as someone who comes from the West, walking into a space like that, if you felt any kind of discomfort.
I think I'd been in similar neighborhoods in Bahia, Brazil, in Ghana, in Cape Verde, probably not as much, but I think so travel and exposure. And also I had taught in New York City public schools and Oakland public schools. I taught in Juvenile Justice Center in Oakland, and those kids, to me, there was sort of more violence in them that they were working through. Some of these kids, we didn't get their back histories, but probably some of them had killed people and, so had certain level of kind of aggression in them. And I was teaching yoga to them, which is, it was, so I think I would say my life experience had sort of prepared me to feel at home or at least comfortable in a space. But of course you're aware that you're an outsider. I mean, that's a part of it. Part of awareness is knowing, that people are aware that this person's different. And so it's not naivety, but it's just moving, I think, with awareness. And, and then people receive you well when you want to be there and when you talk to people and, you're not scared to talk to folks, and even if you don't always understand the dynamics, you're receptive and you're also listening. I watch and listen and don't need to, there's a way to enter a space where, you enter respectfully and mindfully.
Absolutely, I love that. Yeah. And what about bringing capoeira? First of all, I think for those of you who don't know, I think maybe a little bit of an explanation of what capoeira is would be great. Yeah.
So capoeira is an Afro-Brazilian martial art. It was established primarily by the Angolans and Congolese who were enslaved and brought to Brazil as a form of a martial form, self-defense, but also cultural preservation. and resistance to the institution of slavery. So based again on Central West African martial forms. And then there's an influence of different ethnic groups from further north in West Africa, because Africans were brought from, as we know, different regions on the continent. So there's sort of this coming together of different cultural and martial practices within this institution of slavery, within this particular kind of historic moment. And so capoeira is the resistance to, it's some people call it the art of freedom. I like that description, or the art of resistance. I think it's both of those. And it's also because when you're in that condition, you of course don't have any possessions that you take with you. But one of our scholars in the capoeira community describes it as though they couldn't take their material possessions, they could take their culture with them, because that's contained in their minds. And so they brought that with them. And so capoeira has had many different chapters and iterations over the centuries. People look at it today and they're like, oh yeah, that dance thing, that dance kind of fight. I'm like, that's one part of it, aspect of it, but capoeira wasn't always friendly, and even now isn't always friendly. There were, razor blades, and there were weaponry. I mean, you can imagine if you're enslaved and your, longing is for freedom and to resist bondage, then you're going to use what you can to kind of seek that out. So there have been many different iterations, but I'd say for the last century, capoeira was made illegal at the start of the 20th century for various reasons. And then it was sort of made legal again through certain students who were children or family members of influential politicians, and they were studying with this very well-known Mestre Bimba, and these were primarily European descended Brazilians, by the way. That's not by chance that it was made legal through them, right? They had access, they had the opportunity to kind of have influence on that. And so it kind of transitioned into what we call the academy, so sort of an indoor space where it was trained, more like what you think of like a martial arts school or a dance school. And it was sort of codified, people wore uniforms. So it kind of came out of the street and other spaces that it was in and kind of was brought into this safe space. And that's how it survived. It sort of needed to in order to survive in Brazil. Capoeira has always been sort of a master of resilience and reforming itself. And that's kind of taken us in the last 100 years into the capoeira, the way we practice today. And within that, there are many different kind of styles and branches of the art form.
I find it beautiful to watch. I personally have never tried capoeira
before.
I definitely will. I have noticed that everyone wears white.
In our school.
Okay, I've seen that, I think. Okay, maybe it's in the school, or that's not a normal practice? It's something...
I think probably most schools do,
okay.
But it's not, oftentimes these days, school or group will have a specific sort of uniform.
Right.
So some might be black and yellow, some might be white.
Okay.
A lot of them are white, though, yeah.
And the other thing is, so it was interesting because you said something about it coming across as dance, which is always something that when I see capoeira, I just see it as like a mix between martial arts and a beautiful flow dance. I do see how some of the, it does look like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a resistance. There's a word, it'll come to me. But how did you take that into, well, you didn't, but how do you tell people from Kenya, let's say, or Kibera, or men who might see this as something that's more feminine because it does look like a bit of a dance, and convince them to join? Is there a way, like, have you ever struggled with that perception or that stereotype?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, first off, I would say that it's not one of the things about capoeira is it's definitely not an either or. I mean, I think it's a both and many things and. Is capoeira music? Yes. Is it percussion? Yes. Is it dance? Yes. Is it martial arts? Yes. So is it ritual? Very much so, especially in the system and the style that we practice, Capoeira Angola, considered the more traditional form of the art. So I think it is dance as well. And just one note, one thing to say about that is that a lot of African, even Asian martial arts, there is a dance aspect or quality to martial arts in general. It's never really been something that's been separated. So in a lot of African-based martial arts, you have percussion playing. Even in Thai boxing, you may have seen, like if you go to Thailand, they're playing music, and they have like their shrine and altar. So there's a spiritual aspect to preparation that happens before you go fight. You don't just go fight, there are things you do. Capoeira has a lot of this when you kind of dig into it and get into the sort of mysticism of the art and also the spiritual principles and philosophy and history of the art. But coming back to your question of sort of dance and how people sort of, and men in particular perhaps, well, first off, I came into a dance organization teaching capoeira. So the kids weren't scared. They're dancers already. They're already b-boys, which are break dancers. So they're, in terms physically, they're used to being on their hands because we have a lot of inverted movements in capoeira, as you've seen. Used to being on their heads because we go on our heads in capoeira as well. And so there's a lot of the sensibility and awareness of movement that translates from breaking to capoeira. So in my case, it was sort of easier because the kids are already dancers. So the dance thing wasn't, that actually probably was more their entry point. So now it's like, well, what's this martial aspect? In terms of my general history, I think people are very curious about capoeira. I think there's sort of an assumption that, it's not a real martial art. And that's fine. If people, there's nothing that needs to be explained on, to me. It's kind of like if you know, you know. And capoeira has never been an art form to sort of need to broadcast its efficacy. Like it's actually been an art form that's had to, if anything, kind of hide the martial aspect. So, I'm not someone who has to have the banner, well, yes, this is a real martial art. People can kind of, if someone's interested, they'll research, they'll find out, they'll come to class. You can see the work, everything's on kind of socials now, and sort of, if you have eyes to see it, then you'll know but I can also say that I've had at least 2 students who here in Nairobi in the last 6-7 years who've been in confrontations and by their words have used their capoeira training to be able to get themselves to safety. One was a woman, who was being sort of, accosted by 2 men actually, trying to get at her phone and maybe her purse. And she put one down and was able to get away. And what's interesting is that when she says what happened, she's like, I don't even know what I did to like disarm this person and put them down. But she definitely was acknowledging her, her training to her confidence and ability to kind of, evade.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. And then one more was more recent. One of my students in the last maybe 8 months who was confronted in town, and he said that, and he was able to get himself out to safety as well, and used some more movements that we train to get himself to safety. But he said, like before I started training, I would have, in that situation, I would have shrunk. Like that was he's kind of a nerdy guy, and like, highly intellectual, but also had done different physical training. But he said, before training, I know my response would have been this, and, but that wasn't
really
the response.
Fascinating,
now.
because I didn't know there was, and again, because I've never trained in capoeira before, but I didn't know there was a self-defense aspect to the movements. But I guess when you say it's a martial art, of course there is some sort of self-defense when it comes to that. But I've never really seen it as that, and I guess I've just watched it, as a third person, and I just see the movements as so beautiful and flowing, and that's why I do see it a bit more like a dance. But if it's teaching you skills that it can actually help you defend yourself, that's incredible.
Skills and the movements, all of the movements we train are attacks, defenses, evasions. Capoeira the philosophy and approach to it is a bit different than a lot of Asian martial arts in that we don't look to block. It's more about evading and elusiveness, and so there's that softening to an attack, so the idea is that you evade something or elude it, and therefore don't put yourself in harm, like blocking, using your body to block something. So you actually keep yourself. We can do movements at some point.
No, let's do it. Like maybe 1 or 2.
Sure.
No, like now?
Now? Okay.
Yeah. Oh wow, I didn't even know that. Okay, that's really
it's
good
a martial
to
art,
know.
the foundation of capoeira. So
Okay.
everything we do is sort of with that underpinning.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I do get, and I see how that could be a draw for, and I'm just going to make this a little bit more male focused because I feel like living in Kenya, men are very masculine.
Yeah.
And not saying that they aren't anywhere else, but I feel like Kenyans are very like, we only do what manly things that's manly.
Yeah.
So you also teach yoga, and have you felt that there is a bit of a resistance to that practice?
By men.
Yeah.
Well, I think my experience and history of teaching yoga in Nairobi started when I first came. I first stayed for about 5.5 months back in 2008. And I was teaching yoga and I was teaching Capoeira Angola back then. And then prior to moving back to the US. And it was a much smaller yoga community when I was here in 2008. So I feel like I was one of a handful of teachers back then. And I probably, and so back then I think there was, like I saw much fewer men practicing yoga in Kenya. Maybe had 1 or 2 students, but it was primarily women, and usually in a yoga class it will be primarily women. But I do think the perception of yoga and sort of the acceptance of it has shifted in that time. So it's much more visible now. I do see more men. I know that, certainly Africa Yoga Project was sort of instrumental in training a lot of Kenyans, and there were a lot of male Kenyan yoga teachers who came through that organization. And so I think that had an imprint on spreading yoga a bit here, and as well as the influx of, probably diaspora people coming back. And so yes, I think that, for example, at my gym, I am friends with some of the trainers, and they would see me when I was first going there. So I have kind of my own practice. I'm there on the side, like I'm doing yoga, but I also do other functional movement stuff, circular movement, qigong movements, capoeira movements. So my practice for me is a bit fluid and kind of looks different than just yoga or just cardio. It incorporates all these things. So they would kind of, they like make fun of me. Like we just have a fun banter, and we still do. So like they'll do these undulations and things, or body waves, like these things I'm doing. So when they see me from afar, they're like, and I'm like, yeah. And then after a few months, they started like talking to me and asking like, oh, I have a lot of tightness here or there, or like I see your practice, So they started like actually showing interest, and to the point where I would sometimes train a couple of them, or they'd have a practice with me, which I didn't want to do that much because gym time's for me, like it's not teaching time. Sure. Also the Indian aunties, they started grabbing me. Oh my God, they started grabbing, and some of them know me from teaching elsewhere. So when it's like holidays or they're not classes, they're like, can you come do a class with us?
Oh no.
So I'd be like sneaking in, like
wear a mask, hide yourself, hats.
So funny.
Well, my introduction to fitness was actually through yoga.
Nice.
And my sister and I actually traveled to Goa and did a teacher's training course there.
Oh, amazing.
And I love everything about yoga, but I do feel like, first of all, I feel like more men should do yoga.
Yeah.
For several reasons. I think men are very tight.
Yeah.
I think it's great for stress relief. We hold so much stress in our body, so stretching that out and just releasing that.
Yeah.
I have my ex, actually, he is incredible. He does yoga probably every day, not a full practice, but 20 minutes a day. And he's actually a very grounded, centered person. I do believe that yoga brings that into your life. I feel like it brings you to yourself. It helps you connect with your inside, your center space. There's so many benefits. Yeah. But I also see, when I was in Kenya, and I started off teaching, this was, I don't even know, like 10, 12, maybe longer years ago. A lot of people who were in my class were women. I didn't really get too many men coming to class. Yeah. I'm happy to see that things have changed. Yeah. However, in the Kenyan culture, lifting weights is a thing, and being strong, and then saying, hey, why don't you come and do yoga? And a lot of times you feel like men feel like that's a feminine thing. I don't
Yeah.
want to do it. It's for
Yeah.
women.
I
Or
think that's true.
yeah, and I
It's
think
true
it's
that Kenyan men typically
right.
have that
And
response. I think as well, the other thing that comes up is like, oh, this guy's 48 and he's still, like training well and like
right.
keeping his, it doesn't have to be, once we get older, this is kind of what happens to our body. So there's that piece as well in terms of me offering a model at times of sustainability in terms of your health and like, as we get older, how do we adapt our practice, and how do we bring more mobility in addition to the strength training. So that comes up as something that I offer or talk about with some of the younger trainers, because those guys are younger than me. There's like one guy who's my age. That's about it.
Yeah, I mean, you do go to the Westgate gym. There's a lot of young,
young.
really buff trainers that go there.
Yeah, it's those guys.
So did you ever feel like, you said that there's banter, but do you ever feel like that banter has changed now because they have more respect for you as a person, but maybe when it first started, it was almost like they were making fun of you? Or do you ever feel like someone looks at you and questions your masculinity and says, oh, because you do these certain practices, you're not as manly as us?
I think that I generally connect with people.
Right.
So so I think that sort of moves a lot of things out of the way typically. And I don't know what people think, but I'm also, I'm grown enough in my life to not worry about it as well.
Sure.
Or not have, so I'm going to still do my practice there. And but yes, I do think there was the sort of like watching this guy from outside a little bit initially, and then sort of, it transitioning with some of the trainers into more of a dialogue and actually an interest in what I'm doing, or, you develop relationships, we follow each other on socials maybe, and they see, oh, this is interesting work, this Capoeira and Kibera, or, or his yoga work with live music, whatever the case. And those guys have helped me as well. I mean, I've incorporated for a while I was doing some classes, and have incorporated some of the cardio stuff into my own practice. So it's a two-way street, which to me is great.
And maybe this is something that the wisdom you can embark on some of the youth who are looking to do yoga. So let's say there's a teenager male who wants to get into yoga but feels a little bit like, again, this is something more for the females or for the girls in my class, or it's more feminine, and being able to embark that knowledge that it's actually for everyone. This is how it can help you. And if you do get backlash from your friends, maybe there's something they can say, or there's like, they need to just have the inner confidence to say, no, I'm comfortable being who I am. It's not so easy when you're a teenager. We all went through that. It's not so
easy. I think one of the advantages of running this NGO is that it's a good amount of youth, and they're in this community together. Right. So they're able to have these experiences in this space that's separate from other spaces. And I think build sort of confidence and resiliency and all of these things within the community of our NGO as well. And that's the point of it, is to actually create a certain culture within it where people are experiencing different things. In a capoeira class, for example, you're going to sing. That's a common fear for people, to sing in public. You're going to play instruments. You're going to, you're going to dance. You're going to do martial arts. You may get swept, or you may get a headbutt to the chest. And so you learn how to not just evade, but also just receive things sometimes and sort of control your emotions when things happen, because that's one of the common things. And if you're spending a bit of time in capoeira, then, someone kicks you to the face, your typical response is, and that's not happening very often, and especially in the way that we practice, but it's there. And sometimes the games will elevate, or you might have students who are a little more advanced, where they're going to push each other. You want that. So you want to learn what it feels like to get swept, or to sweep, or to receive a headbutt, whatever. But at the moment when you receive that, the normal reaction is, tightening and anger, right? And so capoeira teaches us how to kind of receive it and sort of laugh, but also strategize on how to get someone back in sort of a clean way, or in a way that's like a clean attack, which means I can attack you, I can even put you to the ground, but you're not going to get hurt. Right. So I do it in a way that shows my skill. If I can show all of my attacks and even, let some of them go, but not hurt you. That's how we want to actually practice. That's a different level of control.
That's amazing, because that's also self-restraint.
Yeah.
And I guess you can use that in your day-to-day as well. That somebody,
everything.
you know, whether it's physical or emotional or verbal,
Yes.
that somebody's saying something to you,
Yes.
and you don't take it as an attack. You can
Yeah.
actually be in your space, have that shield,
Yeah.
and say, these things are not going to hurt me.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, find a way to go around and not get back at the person,
Yeah.
but stand your ground and say, okay, here's how I can, my rebuttal, without it being, without it coming out as a backlash, or,
Yeah.
you know, you hit me, I'm going to hit you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But not saying that.
Yeah.
Just being like, you can do what you need to do, and I'm going to stay centered. And then when it's time, I will get you back, put you to the ground, and it doesn't have to hurt you.
This is capoeira.
But just putting, that's, I mean, that's brilliant. I think.
Then this dialogue, this corporal dialogue
Right.
happens constantly. I mean, when you're in the capoeira circle, we call a roda, it's sort of this constant back and forth. You know, a lot of people use the analogy of a conversation. You want to have a good dialogue in capoeira, so there are questions asked and those are answered. And this is, sometimes you're asking the question, sometimes you're asserting something, but still there's a response somehow. Wow. And so this is sort of a back and forth flow. And what we call, in fact, the aesthetic we look for in Capoeira Angola in particular, we say jogo bonito, like a beautiful game. That doesn't mean you don't sweep or they're not attacks. There are. It can also be beautiful with that, in fact. But that's the aesthetic. We want a certain level of conversation between the two practitioners in the circle that is beautiful, both aesthetically and in terms of how they're engaging with each other, but where they're not necessarily just cutting each other down. That's not the aesthetic.
And now, do you feel like you've used these practices in your personal life when it comes to, let's say, your relationship or your kids, your colleagues?
Yeah, for me, capoeira's in everything. I mean, this is now 30 years I've been practicing the art, and so it's, you know, an integral part of my life. I think there's nothing that, in fact, literally all of my work comes out of capoeira. My yoga school, I know my business partner from capoeira, maybe 27 years ago, 26 years ago we met. Inuka Cultural Center, the NGO I co-direct, I met Victor through a mutual friend who's a capoeira practitioner, and he connected us. He said, Victor, you should train with this guy Salim, who just moved to Kenya. So that's from capoeira. And then I have some business in the States, just some small real estate investments, and my two partners for one of the investments from capoeira. And we were training back in the New York mid-2000s and sort of got ourselves together and said, we can, you know, if we pull our money together, we can make an investment out here. But we were training first, we were capoeira.
Incredible.
And so I think part of it is, for me, is that there's a certain sort of culture and trust. Like if you're doing anything with someone over time, especially the arts, then there's a certain trust or understanding, and sometimes a nonverbal thing where you really, and particularly in capoeira, because martial arts in general, you know, it's like martial art groups, typically, if you're training together over time, then there's sort of a looking out for each other kind of thing that happens, right? And that's very much the case. Ideal situations. There are many iterations, and not everything is glossy at all. It can be very much the other side of the spectrum as well. I mean, there's a lot of violence and, you know, violations that happen as well within capoeira, just like yoga within any art form. So that's there too. But when it's practiced well, you have this sort of bond that is created, and and there's certain things, there's certain ways you can move that energy, whether that's investments or business. And so all the work that I do emerges actually out of capoeira relationships.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Was your, from the conversation we were having before, I now take it, your ex-wife, was she into capoeira too?
No,
Okay.
It's funny because when we first met in New York, so one of the aspects of the practice is the roda, which means the circle, right? It's the capoeira circle, it's the ritual of capoeira. And my teacher is an elder mestre in the art, Mestre João Grande, and he would have his rodas every Sunday. Those rodas would go from about 2 p.m. until like 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. Yeah, they were all afternoon, all day affair. And so Sundays, she knew, like, that was my commitment.
That's it, you're done.
Which is sort of, initially okay, but there came a point where she's like, really, every Sunday? And I'm like, look, this was here before. This is going to be here my whole life. So, I maybe made one or two exceptions, but very few, because that was sort of my commitment.
Yeah.
She didn't train, but she would come and watch, and she, I think, really appreciated the art form. Then when we moved to Oakland, around the time our first child was born, she was training for probably like a year so that's where I established my first capoeira group, was in California. And she was training there, and she was really good.
Nice.
Like her intuition, sort of, just her rhythm.
Yeah.
That's a thing, like sort of if you intuitively have like everyone has rhythm, but some people are kind of more in tune with it and have better timing initially. Other people, this is one of the beautiful things about capoeira, is that it sort of offers something to everyone. You may just have a beautiful voice, and that can be your contribution in a capoeira space. You may be particularly interested talented or interested in instruments. That may be your contribution. You may be able to move very well. So there's sort of an entry point for everyone. But she was really picked it up very quickly, the movements. And then, didn't stay with it. And that's sort of normal to me. And I feel like 1% stay with it, like any art.
I think it's in any art, any sport.
Exactly.
It's anything. If you connect with it, and you can connect with it and then want to be with it for a long time, or you can just connect with it. It serves a purpose in someone's life.
Yes.
I mean, I feel like that about yoga. I was very connected. I even taught for a number of years. And then my fitness journey took me to bodybuilding, and then that became the thing that was my passion, something I stuck by, my commitment, all of that went into that space. And I feel like my yoga practice really served my purpose at the time, and then it just kind of fell away, and it's okay. Okay, so in terms of your relationship, so you said that capoeira is your everything. So do you come at this separation with your wife, and you have kids as well?
Yeah.
How do you feel like you've contributed in that relationship? There's fancy words like conscious parenting, conscious uncoupling. Do you feel like you have used that, knowing that you have this capoeira background? Has that helped you with conscious uncoupling and conscious parenting?
I'm sure it has. I think marriage counseling also helped.
Sure, of course.
So, for 2 years before we separated, we were in counseling, and even though it was decided, that we would go separately, I'm sure that the amount of time we put in working through our challenges as a couple contributed to what I think is a very smooth transition into co-parenting. So sort of the foundation of learning how to communicate better and having guidance with that, because this is hard stuff to figure out on your own. And oftentimes we don't have like great guidance from parents. So, they're not necessarily talking about these things with us. So for me, that was really instrumental in terms of how we co-parent today, and the quality of our relationship as two people who really care and love each other, and are on separate paths in a lot of ways, and are on a path together in terms of raising our children.
Right. I think that's what I struggle with. I see so many people, and I'm going to speak specifically about Kenya because that's where we live.
Sure.
I see a lot of people struggling with that, as in people in my own family. My parents struggled with that. That after they separated, they didn't really understand how to co-parent. And I think that's really important. And whether it's going through counseling, whether it's doing a bit of research, whether it's coming to a space and trying to find a middle ground between the couple, like you and your ex-wife. As you said, you have a beautiful relationship still. In terms of just because things didn't work out doesn't mean that we can't work out. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And sometimes I think of it as it did work out, just in a different way.
Right.
But that's life always works out in a different way than we kind of see it, unless we're like really tight on our manifesting skills. But even then, the thing we want it often appears, it's like, oh, it's a little different than when I was picturing it.
Sure.
Of course. But yeah, absolutely. I think that that piece of communication, essentially, and even in our case, as we were approaching the time where it looked like we might be separating, we were with a different therapist at that point, but we started to talk about what that process, in the case that happens, what that would look like. What are our needs? What are certain agreements we have as parents? What's just sort of like a no-go in terms of communication with the kids around it? Like what do we agree to, how do we agree to protect them? And how do we agree to be with each other? How do we agree if in the case that someone else comes into our lives, like what's the sort of protocol around that?
Wow.
So
and you were talking about all of these things before you even separated.
Yeah.
God, that's brilliant.
Yeah. That's why we got help. We would not have done that ourselves.
No, for sure. But you know what? I think what happens is that couples get to the point where they can't see each other anymore. And it's like, okay, they get to that breaking point where you get to the point where you're just like, oh my God, like the world can come to an end, but I don't want to spend 1 second in the room with you.
Yeah, no.
And what you guys did is you're like, okay, you know what? This is where we see it going. And that's a very mature and I don't even know how many amazing words I could say, but it's a great way to see a relationship and say, this path, our path is kind of going like this.
Yeah.
So before we do this, let's just take a step and transition together.
It was so essential, and I'm like ever grateful for like all the counselors and therapists. There were 2 primary ones so both that we worked with. And the last one we saw while we were here in Kenya in particular really helped sort of guide that process for us. And that was essential to how we raise our kids.
Right.
And so, you know, obviously make no mistake, and there's no illusion, that is traumatic on your children. We understand that that's going to be the hardest thing in their lives probably. Certainly was for me the hardest thing I had gone through at that point, and probably since. So with that understanding, how do we make it as sort of easy on each other and seamless and caring, and you know, so I think there were those conversations, and there were still, of course, you know, rockier initially, and over time things smoothed out.
And did you get any kind of, you see, the reason I ask this question is because I take it from a East Indian background.
Sure.
And when it comes to, you know, divorce or separation, it's given such a taboo that it's almost like, you know, you've committed the biggest crime. You might as well have killed someone.
Yeah.
You probably would have been let off easier by your family than a divorce. But I just feel like, I don't know if it's cultural, maybe it's your Western background that said, okay, we identify that there's something not working and let's work with a counselor. And that to me is so spectacular. And how your you know, did your family come in and say, we support you? Or, because again, coming from an East Indian background, it would be like, you fight for this no matter what. You stay in it no matter
there
what.
Was that too, from family.
Okay.
My mother-in-law, for example, was very much, you know, like, I mean, she sort of, and I love her. And there were times when, you know, she just sort of would present, I think, certain, you know, it's out of her wanting to keep the family together.
Of course.
But the communication was not helpful to the children or to us, just saying certain things in front of the kids, and it's like, like we're working on, you know, but you know, that's a part of family, and sometimes you have to kind of, you know, you have to work with who you're with in your family, and then there might just have to be additional communication, you know, to the kids, for example, if she's sort of saying something. So I think that's probably where we had the most resistance. I personally remember sort of presenting this to my my ex-wife's father. I remember like kind of meeting him at Java over a tea, and this is right in the middle of it, like right when we're about to, and I sort of and I told him what was happening, you know, and I was like, this is where things are going. And I'm just like, I'm in the middle of Java, so I'm not trying to have like, you know, but I'm about to like break. I can just feel it. Like the floodgates are like right there.
No.
And I just couldn't, because it, to me, didn't feel like the safe space to like let all that out in front of this, you know, elder Somali man, you know. But he was so compassionate and like, you know, he's like, he was kind of soothing me. He was like, don't worry. He had been through divorce himself. He had divorced his first wife, my ex-wife's mom, and, you know, then remarried. So he was just very compassionate and caring and, you know, was kind of soothing actually. And I think that my mother-in-law in her own way was that, you know, she really loves me and we, again, have a great relationship. But I think even her, even though her communication style and timing was not great, it was out of a love and also a care for us as a family and for me as well.
Of course, and I think I completely respect that you know the family's trying to keep them together, the couple together, because you don't want to see a broken family, you don't want the kids to be separated. But I think when it comes to, and I'll use the word again, conscious uncoupling and conscious parenting, the kids don't have to feel like the whole world has come to an end. And I grew up in a family where my parents, they stayed together for way too long. And what ended up happening is that we as kids saw so much conflict between them that actually affected us. The trauma is so much deeper. And there's so much more healing that's required because of watching two people who were not in love try to stay together. And I feel like people, and I have an ex and I have, you know, a few people I know who have gone through this path of, let's make this work, let's make this beautiful, let's separate. Like you said, of course there's going to be some kind of effect on the kids. It just doesn't have to be so traumatic.
Exactly.
And I think what happens is that parents try to stay together because of the kids. Let's stay together because of the kids, or you must be together because of the kids. And I'm a live example. Don't do that. You know, the kids are going to be so much worse than if they just saw two loving parents who still had respect for each other, because you don't go to the breaking point. So you get to the point where you're just like, okay, we recognize, like you said, and for 2 years you were working with a therapist of how do we do this transition, instead of working on it for.
Well, we were trying to keep it together at that point. And then there came a point where it's like
it's not going to work.
It's not sustainable.
And
it's not working.
Still working with a therapist, which not too many people do. Getting to the point where you're saying, okay, it's not working anymore, and then two people, out of respect, making that decision that we need to, instead of just, you know, it just blowing up overnight. There
are alternatives. There are other ways, and there's information that we have today on how to best do this. And very much, my kid's mom was, you know, as probably more than I was helping pioneer this. So even though I'm the guy from the West, like she's, you know, was very informed and very, you know, was very much about, and then getting support for our children as well. We also had not many sessions, but a few. They did like some art therapy after separation as well, just so we could sort of understand what they need and where they were from a professional's perspective. So we did that as well, actually, with them, which helped give us a bit of insight in terms of what's going on in their inner world that we may not sense, but you know, therapists can sort of give different language and give some guidance on what support they need.
I think therapists are amazing, and I think they're so imperative, whether people are going through a tough time or just you're walking through life just not knowing or not understanding. And I just think that they just kind of gather your thoughts and help you unravel them in a more systematic way.
And shed insight into aspects of your own mind or thoughts or emotions that we're, you know, limited to, you know, we're just processing it through our own minds, or maybe a friend or someone we have a relationship with, which is loaded, you know, with history and things. So having someone who doesn't have all that come in and understands, you know, and has been trained in this can be very helpful.
Absolutely. So with all of these classes that you've had, especially in Kenya, and I think you must have come across exceptional students over the last few years. Is there one particular success story that you'd like to share with us? You can be two if you want.
Well, the one that comes to mind is one of my current students who it's been training now maybe 2.5 years, 3 years at our studio. And when she first came in, she'd get in an argument. She's a little bit, could be a little antagonistic, I think, and a bit of an instigator. And so she would get into something with someone like every class, at some point. I mean, they weren't getting into fist fights, but it just was, would get sort of competitive, or she'd rub someone the wrong way, or she would, storm out upset. And she's now been training 2.5 years. I think a year maybe after she started training capoeira, we started seeing like even less, but started seeing a very different personality of her start to emerge. And then her mom came in and said, I'm not going to say her name, but she's different. Wow. She's more responsible at home. Her schoolwork's improving. She's losing weight. She was a little bit overweight. So she's leaning out. Of course, she's growing, but she's training. And since then, this is to me one of just beautiful voice. This girl has a wonderful voice. And I've just seen her, so it's a part of, being with someone in a certain window of time. She probably came in when she was, if she's maybe 12 now, maybe came in at 9. So these are obviously formative years, right? And to be influential on someone's development, to the point now where none of those issues happen. Like, she's not getting into it with anyone in the class. She's like made rich, deep friendships particularly with the other girls. That's who it usually was with. Sure. And I just see this personality that really showcases who I think a more authentic, or at least a more, healthy version of herself. And I've seen this with a number of students, but there's one student in particular that was, in general, it was like every class we had to kind of like initially had to like deal with her.
That could be a defense mechanism or something that's going on at home. That anger, I grew up with a lot of anger issues, and I didn't know how to channel it. So it did come out with, being physically abusive or hitting someone or breaking things. And because you don't know how to channel that pain and that anger. So this could be something, I can assume that can really help kids have a space to release that emotional blocks.
Absolutely. Without
actually using words, because sometimes kids don't really want to talk about it.
Yeah, or they're like most of us, their actions reflect what's really going on. Right. And so I've seen that with this particular student. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Well, thank you for helping.
Yeah.
Kids.
It's my work.
And the universe and the world. So last question: is there anything that like an end comment or something that you would like to share with the audience, and you can address them directly, that you feel would really make a difference to their lives? And this could be something that turns into your legacy, or I don't know, will make it big.
Well, since we've been talking a lot about capoeira in this particular session, I would say this idea and philosophy and approach to life of play beautifully is something that I think we can all, that resonates with all of us. Let's remember to play. We're here, we have this beautiful experience in life. There's, of course, trials and challenges. That's part and parcel of it. I think part of this drama that we're in of life is figuring out how to sort of respond and, to different situations. We don't have control of what happens in the world, but hopefully we're working on having control of ourselves. And to me, that's it. That's sort of a guiding principle that I like to take from capoeira to the world, that we need to play, we need to remember, connect with our inner child, find the joy, the things that light us up, and make that play beautiful.
I love that. I love that. Play beautifully. I love that. I am so thrilled that you came on the podcast.
Likewise.
I have learned so much.
Me too.
I am definitely coming for a class.
Good.
And I can't wait until our episode 2.
Okay, good.
Part 2
coming.
It's coming. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did. I was particularly interested in the conscious uncoupling and conscious parenting. If you guys have any questions about that, or about capoeira, or yoga, or anything in between, please reach out, send me a DM, or just drop a comment below, and we'll get back to you.